Grab your popcorn, find your seats, and get ready, because this episode of the Cinema Spotlight is about to begin. Subscribe if you're new, and please, enjoy the show. Hello everybody, and welcome to the Cinema Spotlight. This is the show where we dissect all things movies, TV, and everything in between. I am your host and self-proclaimed media expert, James Sena. I hope you're ready, because today we have the superhero episode, centering on a genre that's absolutely been raking at the box office. Joining us for today's endeavor is my good friend Gabe, and together we will join forces and we will tackle The Flash in our Oscar watch, followed by the return of the segment Genres in General. And we will end the episode with another installation of The Draft Room. With that, this episode of the Cinema Spotlight is about to begin. And of course, here's an official spoiler warning for all content discussed here today. And if you wish to skip around to avoid spoilers, you can find timestamps in the description both on YouTube and Spotify for your convenience. That said, let's shine a spotlight on The Flash.
Oscar watch. Oscar watch.
Now, of course, when you think of the Oscars, I'm sure you probably weren't envisioning The Flash to be in that same conversation. There was so much controversy surrounding this movie initially with the writers, the directors, the cast, that initially I was not even sure I wanted to cover it, let alone even watch the movie itself. But I do feel like this movie, at the very least, does provide some super interesting dialogue that we can really sink our teeth into. Will The Flash win an Oscar? Well, to figure that out, as well as breaking down the pros and cons of the movie, I have my dear friend, my bestest friend, Gabe Lenfestey, here to give me a hand and talk about all the nitty-gritty. Gabe, you want to introduce yourself and then tell us how you felt about going into a movie like this?
Hey everyone. I am happy to be here. I'm Gabe. I've known James for a few years now. We studied film together in college, and one of our favorite things to talk about was just generally debating superhero films as a genre. So I'm really excited that he picked me up for the superhero episode of the podcast. I think that's a cool full circle moment.
Heck yeah, and I'm excited to have you on because I know, as far as superhero movies, I think you are even more well versed than I am in this. So going into like the DC, with how much of a mess the DCEU has sort of been, did you have any initial thoughts or concerns going into this movie?
I think the DC's in a really unique place, and I think that kind of where you think the DC is kind of informs what your opinion is going to be going into this movie, right? If you look at it as the end of the DCEU that has been going on for the past couple of years, you see kind of a film that's guaranteed to not be that good. It's guaranteed to flop. It's not going to, you're going to be disappointed. If you see it as maybe the first film or the first opportunity for James Gunn's incoming franchise, there's a lot of hope there. There's a lot of interesting room for growth or interesting story decisions that could matter in the future of DC films. It's kind of exciting. So I tried to go in with, not too high hopes because, I've seen a DC movie before, but,
Right.
but, expecting maybe some fun things that might matter in the future.
Yeah, and before we jump into a discussion on what the movie is about and everything like that, let's give some credit to the people behind the scenes. So, this movie is directed by Andrés Muschietti. I'm going to pronounce it that way.
Looks about right.
We have Barry Allen, played by Ezra Miller. We have... I'm going to credit Batman as Michael Keaton, although there's plenty of Batmans in this movie. And then, of course, we have Supergirl as Sasha Calle, and there's a lot of cameos in this movie as well. So, I mean, if we're missing some people, there's a lot of amazing talent that did work on this movie. But can I send it to you, Gabe? And can you talk about maybe one of your biggest highlights of the movie itself? What did you watch this movie, and what was like one of the biggest check marks?
There weren't a lot of check marks. I have to say that right out the gate. But I think just overall, one thing that surprised me about the film is that it was pretty fun. I think that you look at it objectively as a film, it may not be the greatest, but
Sure,
I
sure.
actually had fun watching it. Whether it could be considered a good film or not on paper, I actually kind of had fun.
Which is, I mean, that's really what matters, right? I mean, when you're doing a rating of a movie, a lot of the time, for me at least, enjoyment is like the number one thing that I focus on. That actually, do you have a rating out of 10 that you would give this movie? Because I have a rating, but I'm curious how close we are.
I struggle with a rating. I thought for a while about what I would rate the movie. Officially, I went with probably a 4 out of 10.
Okay.
It could be lower, but I think I gave it an extra one or two stars just for that like enjoyment. Like I said, it wasn't great as a film, but I just had so much fun with it that it had to bump my rating up a little bit.
Which is totally valid because I mean, just a little behind the scenes for the people at home listening. There was a moment where maybe we thought our ratings would be skewed. But I'm at a 4.3 out of 10. So for me, like, it seems like we're right just about the same. I think for me,
Okay.
what landed me there, when I think about a superhero movie, and we'll talk about this more later in the episode, I need the action to be something that I can really enjoy, and I don't know. Like, I think for me, what really carried this movie to make it actually enjoyable was the performances by the cast. I thought Michael Keaton was a lot of fun, and I thought that the cameos were a lot of fun. I thought Sasha Kaye as Supergirl was definitely a fun watch, and I think she did a great job with what she was given. And I think for me, I mean, that's definitely one of the biggest pluses, was Michael Keaton's performance was very entertaining, and overall I think the acting was good. And if I had to just, because I only really have one more pro, if I'm going to be honest, so I might as well throw it out there. I think for me, time travel is such a finicky plot device to try to use in a movie, let alone a superhero movie. And we've seen recently a lot of multiverse stuff. We've seen sort of things in the past where there's time travel, and a lot of the times it just feels really clunky. But this movie, I think it made the right choice of going with a predestination type of time travel, because there's a lot of different types in science fiction that you can go into, but the predestination they stuck to it and it made sense. And I think that at the very least that gimmick of the movie was pretty coherent. But what's your take on all that?
I starting off strong, I'm gonna have to disagree with pretty much everything you just said.
Oh, okay, all right. Let's hear it, my friend. Let's hear it. Let's get into it.
Let's see. The first thing you brought up, the performances.
Mm-hmm.
I have to say, the one thing that kind of really took me out of this movie was that whenever any of the actors opened their mouths, it just took me out of it. There was something about, I don't know if it was the delivery, I don't know if it was the writing, but I think some of the jokes were okay, some of the jokes were kind of funny, the dialogue was witty or whatever, but I just think that overall the acting and the delivery tended to be a little bit more corny than I would have liked, and it kind of took me out of it a lot.
Mm-hmm. From anyone in particular in the movie? Because for me, I definitely hear that, and in a lot of the jokes, like the second version of Ezra Miller, like the younger version of them, a lot of those jokes fully was like, they missed for me. They just weren't funny. A lot of the jokes were cringe. I guess for me, if it wasn't for Michael Keaton, I probably wouldn't even make the statement about the acting. But yeah, I mean, I get that. Can we agree though on one thing here? And that's the VFX, or is it the VFX? Is that what it's called?
Sure, VFX, CGI.
The very obvious freaking plastic baby dolls in that opening scene. Like, what the hell was that?
Yeah, that was and what's weird is I think this movie just had a weird thing about putting babies in danger, because there was that one line towards the end where they mentioned that they killed baby Superman, and so I don't know what it is with this movie and babies, but it yeah, that opening scene was a little weird.
Yeah, and honestly, like, one other thing about that opening scene that I want to talk about, and this is something I really want to get your thoughts on, because it's something that I kind of feel, but I'm curious if I'm alone on this. I feel like when speedsters in superhero movies, so we're talking The Flash, Quicksilver, anyone of that nature, if they use a scene where to show the super speed, everything else is really slowed down, I think that there are ways to do it right. I think that the Quicksilver scene in the X-Men was done right because it's almost like there's a timer on the scene. But this opening scene, was it just me, or I felt like the pacing of the movie really, really suffered because of they kept slowing down everything to show the super speed. But in doing so, it made the movie feel super slow. So am I crazy for thinking that?
I would say you're pretty right. I think you made a good point there, which is something I hadn't quite noticed about the Quicksilver scene in the X-Men films, is that they always kind of have a timer on them. There's always something going on that limits just how much he can screw around while time is in slow motion. And
Right.
that really helps to kind of pick up the pace in the scene and make us feel like the scene is still grinding itself forward unrelentingly, even if this guy usually has all the time in the world. And I think that a lot of the time, in some of the scenes not so much, but in especially the opening scene, it felt like he was just kind of lackadaisically running around having a good time and catching some babies. It didn't really feel like there was a lot of urgency.
That's such a funny sentence. He's just running around catching some babies, man.
Yeah.
And yeah, and it's like the thing is like I understand that Barry is supposed to be a little bit goofy. Like he has a sense of humor in the comics, the character Barry Allen. But I mean, I don't know. I think for me, it just I don't know. I think there could be some bias. I don't love this version of Barry Allen that they brought forward. I think that there's enough comedy there where it's like okay, but then in this movie, especially with two of them, it just felt like way too much. And then the fact that Batman really wasn't a super serious character either, it didn't help.
I agree with you. I think it was just a little goofy, and I'm okay with that. I think that the movie knew what it wanted to be. It knew that it was a comic book movie, and it leaned into it, and I do appreciate that. But I do think that one of the key things in a comic book movie is that they also tend to be very tragic in nature. And I think I'm not sure exactly why, but in order for a comic book movie to work, you have to nail both the goofy and the tragedy in order for them both to feel realistic. And I think that the movie did an alright job with how goofy it was, but it just kind of dropped the ball with all of the emotional scenes or the sad scenes, which just made the movie feel too goofy and not very well balanced overall.
Yeah, would you say that through the lack of those emotional beats, or at least the mishandling of them, because like I found myself not really even caring that much by the end of the movie. Like, did you feel that too?
Yeah, I had a hard time. I mean, there's the scene where Barry goes back and then it gives us that flashback of the day his mother died, and I just couldn't help but feel like none of the actors actually felt sad in that scene, and as a result, I couldn't really get myself to care.
Right, and I feel like if this, I don't know, like I don't know why they incorporated, like I mean I get it why they incorporated that scene, but if they were trying to go for some sort of Flash origin, I'm not sure why they took that route, and they left out the Reverse Flash altogether, which is another choice where it's like we unfortunately we don't have the time to really get into that, but I feel like there were just one thing I'll say before we move on to some of the other conversations that I want to have. Do you feel like there were missed opportunities in this movie as far as building upon this movie for future films?
That's a hard answer, because I think that it's very clear, especially given the ending of the movie, that they used this movie as a way of shifting the universe into a point of uncertainty where James Gunn can take it and do whatever he wants with it. It's very open, and that was the goal of doing a sort of Flashpoint-based film. So, and in that regard, I would say that they succeeded. At the end of the movie, it's very ambiguous as to what the state of this universe is now that things have been kind of tweaked a little bit, and that does leave that room for things to shift and for new films to be made, for actors to be recast or whatever, so that James Gunn can kind of do whatever he wants. But there's just something about it that I don't think quite worked. I think that, and maybe it's because I'm not an expert on it, but maybe it's because I just know a little bit generally about like the Flashpoint comic book.
Right.
I knowing the origin of that film, I'm sorry, that story, and knowing that they were trying to take some inspiration from it, I couldn't help but feel a little bit disappointed, because I felt like they took the main origin of the plot, that Barry Allen went back to save his mother and then screwed up the timeline, screwed up the multiverse. They kept that, and then they shifted it into something that was a little bit more stereotypical big battle against a superhero in a field. And it's potentially such an emotional and interesting story with a lot of potential for itself and for future films. I don't know. It's hard to determine.
I'm definitely on the same page, where it's like, I see that there were some stones, or is that, I don't even know if that's the right expression. There were definitely some, what am I trying to say? Definitely, like, there's a path laid out, I guess, to leave it, like, they tried to leave it ambiguous, and they tried to leave it a little bit open for James Gunn to come in and maybe just cherry pick what he wants from it, because that's sort of what's allowed based on what we see. That being said, I think that there's still issues with it. Like, I feel like, I don't know, it's just, there a lot of, the movie felt like there needed to be more risks taken in order, like, why did the movie exist? Like, why does this movie need to exist? Because I feel like the movie needed to exist to create a flashpoint where things like this could happen. And in response, I guess one of my final things that I would say about it is, I felt like the movie just tried to get us to a place where that is the case, but then the rest of the movie suffered from that, because I feel like a lot of the stakes weren't really met. Like, I didn't really find myself very, I mean, one thing I will say that I disagreed a little bit before with what you were saying. For me, I lost a lot of entertainment value, because for me, by the end of the film, it was like, well, what was the point of watching any of that?
I agree.
So
with
that was like something that kind of bothered me, especially if they're trying to reboot the whole universe, which is something that we can definitely go into in the following segment. But with the time that we have left, Gabe, can you let the people know how many Oscars this movie is going to win?
I would say somewhere between 0 and 1, probably on the lower end of that range.
That's very generous. It's a very generous scale of, I don't think that there's a world. I think that they would give up an Oscar before they got one.
I said between 0 and 1.
That's true.
It's not gonna hit 1.
That's true. You said so. Half of one. I don't even know if there's a category where this would even be nominated. Like, definitely not visual effects. I mean, this was Polar Express quality of, like, some of these characters.
I couldn't have thought of a better descriptor myself. That's accurate.
It's just, oh man, like, visually this movie was not great. I think that if I had to pick a highlight from this movie, it was, I think at one point in the movie there was like a one take that lasted like 2 minutes of Batman in action, which I thought was cool. At the beginning, the Batman sequence that was pretty short was also kind of cool, but it left a lot to be desired, I would say.
Visually, yeah, I would agree. I think that it was shot fine outside of the kind of, I guess, speedster scenes or whatever you want to call them.
Yeah.
It was shot competently. I might even go as far as to say that it looked good. I don't think it was shot well enough to win an Oscar for that. And I think even if outside of those speedster scenes, even if it was like Oscar-worthy cinematography, I think that those scenes with like the rubber mask-looking people running around constantly just pulls that bar so far down.
Yeah, I think you're dead on with that. And I think the other thing too is, just on a general basis, I don't think superhero movies really lend themselves to win Oscars anyway, but we're going to talk about why that might be the case in the next segment. So we're gonna be right back, but until then, don't go away. Which movies do you want mentioned on the Oscar Watch? Let us know on Instagram at _cinema_spotlight and drop a follow while you're there to get updates, behind the scenes details, and to participate in polls following each episode. Now, let's get back to the show. And we're back. Okay, so this next segment, as I alluded to, is another installation of genres in general. This is where we'll break down a movie genre and we will analyze what makes it tick. What are the main tropes? What are the best films? What do these movies excel in? What do they suffer from? These questions, among many more, we will try to tackle today in 15 minutes or less. But just to get us started, Gabe, can you tell the people about why exactly superhero movies don't win Oscars, as we kind of talked about last segment a little bit?
I think there are kind of two trains of thought here, or rather, it's kind of a twofold answer. A lot of it is that there is an assumption about superhero movies, and sometimes that assumption is correct, and sometimes it is not. But the people behind the curtain who decide, what movie gets to win an Oscar and what doesn't, tend to assume that these things are always true about a superhero movie. I mean, look at the worst of the superhero films that have come out. Movies like The Amazing Spider-Man 2, there's Thor: The Dark World. There are movies that really do not deserve to win anything. Thor: Love and Thunder, The Eternals, and so on. But there are really good superhero films. They're Guardians Volume 3, both of the Spider-Verse films. I personally like Iron Man 3, even though I know a lot of people disagree. The Avengers, Infinity War. There are a lot of films that are good enough, at least in my opinion, to win these awards, but I think that because of this precedent set by these bad comic book movies, people tend to assume that they are kind of low effort, CGI. They're just action movies with not a lot of heart, not very well shot, not very well acted, very one-dimensional. And I think that a lot of times that isn't true, but people, these assumptions have been reinforced in the past, and so it's hard for people, especially people who are film critics, to look past these and stop making that kind of assumption.
Yeah, I mean, do you think that there's some sort of parallel there with superhero movies and something like a horror movie, or something like even animated movies? Because we're talking about the last episode on the show, we talked about Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, something that as of the time of recording is probably one of the better films made this year. Is there something, because really there is some sort of, I mean, there's definitely a precedence. I love that you said that, because there's definitely a precedence where movies like this don't win Oscars, but then you'll have some cases where I think just this past year, and correct me if I'm wrong, did Wakanda Forever win? I think it may have won an Oscar for like best costume or something like that.
I'm not. Let me look that up. I'm not sure about Wakanda Forever. I think it did win best costume design, and I remember the first Black Panther also won either costume design or set design or something. So I think,
Right.
I mean, people don't immediately discount these films, but I mean, try to imagine any superhero movie winning Best Picture. Like, no matter how good the movie is, it's just not gonna win. They'll set it aside. They'll give it the small ones like set design, stuff like that. But they're not gonna let a superhero movie win one of the big ones.
Right, and I think you hit the nail on the head of like people looking at those precedents, but also you just furthermore, like, when you think of a superhero movie, you think of a kids movie, or you think of a movie that is intentionally not meant to be taken seriously, meant to be just a blockbuster, turn your brain off and enjoy it, when in actuality there are a lot of good superhero movies that really excel in writing and character work and acting performances. There are some that absolutely exist, and just gonna pivot here a little bit away from the Oscar conversation, but what do you think makes a superhero movie? Because it is a subgenre. It's not. I don't know if I would say it's a genre in and of itself. What do you think separates it from other action movies, and just like bare bones?
I'm gonna separate. I'm gonna make a distinction here. So when I'm talking about superhero movies, I'm referring to the best of superhero movies.
Gotcha.
There
Okay.
a lot of my statements may not be true for some of the worst ones, but I think that looking at their comic book origin, looking at what a lot of superhero movies have managed to do, the core thing is that a lot of superhero films have a lot of, like I've mentioned in the previous section, a lot of tragedy, a lot of sad moments, and a lot of really intimate moments with the characters. Look at the entirety of Spider-Man. Look at the Guardians of the Galaxy films. They have some action, but they have a lot of heart and a lot of themes and a lot of emotion behind them. Some sadness a lot of the time. And I think that, and I may be generalizing because I don't tend to be a huge fan of action films, but a lot of action movies tend to not have that. They tend to say, hey, look at our cool shots, look at our fun choreography, look at Keanu Reeves do all these flips. And they a lot of the time tend to discount or remove a lot of the heart and the emotion and the important thematic statements that comic book movies and the comic books that they came from, like to talk about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And man, I mean, there's just the thing about superhero movies that I think for me and what makes it, because I love what you said about making sure to balance the heart of it. And I think that along with this other idea that I want to talk about, where superhero movies, and correct me if I'm wrong, are they, would you say that they're inherently an adaptation? Is that like a good way to describe it, would you say?
I think so. I think that they tend to do. None of the superhero movies we've ever really gotten tend to, or at least like the Marvel and the DC ones. I haven't seen every superhero movie in the world, but they don't tend to perfectly adapt the comic book that they came from. They kind of take the core idea and then kind of riff on it.
Right.
But I do think that they inherently are kind of an adaptation. A lot of the base, the log line of the story in any superhero movie is taken from the comic book that it's based off of.
Right. And when we're looking at all these superhero movies and we're looking at the genre itself, I want to definitely tackle, what do you think these movies, because we already kind of talked about like what it does well. Like obviously there are action sequences. You're gonna see fights. I think it's interesting because a lot of superhero a lot of superhero movies are about as close to like a live action anime, maybe is a way that you could say. It's like some of the closest that you can possibly get to that, where you're seeing these fights and you're seeing stuff like that. That's what these movies do well. Action movies in general, genres in general, they will make your heart race a little bit. They will give you an adrenaline boost. So I think it's really evoking that emotion of being at the edge of your seat, less so than a thriller where I think you're just excited. It excites you to see this stuff, whereas other movies and other different genres, I feel like they affect you in a different way, where you're watching it and you're watching it for enjoyment, but each genre kind of elicits a different type of reaction from you. And superhero movies are typically fan favorite movies because of how they make you excited and how they get you all pumped up and amped up. Especially like what comes to mind for me is in Avengers Infinity War, when Thor is entering Wakanda and bring me Thanos, like that line, the whole theater just starts getting the goosebumps on your arms, the hair raises, and you get all excited. So what do you think, what other aspects of these movies, Gabe, do you think help add to that, of just evoking a certain reaction and a certain emotion from the audience?
You hit a really good point there, in that a lot of, let me rephrase, superhero movies have the propensity to have such exciting and rewarding moments. A lot of people who aren't huge fans of superhero movies would call that fan service, but like scenes where, like the scene where Thor drops down into Wakanda and says, "Bring me Thanos." I struggle to think of many moments like that in non-superhero films, moments that made me that excited for the character, moments that like had me like shaking in my eyes wide, like, oh my god, this is crazy, this is so exciting. It's hard to emulate that with a non-superhero film. I think that is a major staple of the genre.
Right, and just to, because what you said just made me kind of think about something, so I'm gonna piggyback on that. What's crazy to me is we love that emotion that it evokes, and I feel like what's so just mind-boggling to me is that this superhero movies themselves, they bring that excitement out of you, and you even said you can't think of non-superhero movies that would be able to do that. The ones that can are typically looked as or seen as some of the best movies in general. So like movies that come to mind when I think about something like that is the ending of Whiplash. I don't know if you've seen Whiplash, but
I love that movie.
Yeah, the ending of Whiplash absolutely for me is just my jaws to the ground and I'm getting excited. Or I mean, I guess you could maybe say a movie like Rocky possibly with getting you kind of excited, but these movies are seen as great all-time movies, whereas superhero movies, they can elicit that emotion, but for some weird reason that's not respected, which is kind of baffling to me. That it brings out one of our favorite emotions, which is excitement, and it just kind of falls flat. And even, I mean, superhero movies do that. There are other types of genres of movies that, I mean, action adventure movies like Jurassic Park, I wouldn't consider those superhero movies, but they don't even come really close to, I mean, maybe the originals, but especially the new Jurassic. I mean, for any of those who have seen my episode on Jurassic Park knows that or Jurassic World, excuse me, know that I am not a fan of what they've done to that type of franchise. But superhero movies, even like the lesser ones, at least one or two moments in the movie, they do get you excited. So that's one of my favorite things about this genre, just as we look at it. But what do you think a superhero movie, as we kind of ramp down on how much on this segment, is there something that you think a superhero movie needs to have in order for it to be a good one?
I keep on going back to this. I'm going to start sounding like a broken record, but I think that at the core of any comic book story is a perfect balance of excitement and tragedy or emotion.
Right.
And I think that, like I said when I was maybe complaining about The Flash, is that if you don't balance those, it comes across as goofy and disingenuous every single time. I think at the core of every superhero story is something deeply emotional, whether it's tragic or horrific or sad, that makes you resonate so much with those characters and with the story that they're telling, that you kind of can't have a superhero movie without, or almost can't. There are exclusions, but you almost can't have a superhero movie without those moments of tragedy that make you really bond to the character, so that you can feel excited when it gets kind of goofy and exciting and wacky, as opposed to maybe thinking that they're going a little too far.
I'm gonna press you a little bit here. Do you think in a superhero movie there needs to be a tragic backstory for it to be a good one, or do you think it has to have a backstory, or just something? Do you think that there has to be some sort of tragedy there in order to bring that heart, or do you think that there's other ways that the movie can earn it?
I think there might be ways that a movie could earn it. I think, because I'm not a great fan of people putting films in boxes. I don't like the concept of a genre. I know that we're talking about superhero movies as a genre, but right. I think I have a hard time saying that a superhero film absolutely needs to be tragic, because I don't want to try to apply these rules to an entire category of films and just put them in that box. But if you look at all of these superhero movies, so many of them, almost every single one of them, has some sort of tragedy behind it. And I think that really is the key to why you're having so much fun, is because those make you bond with and root for the characters so much.
And I think that's a good point. And do you think so? As well as like a backstory, I think is one part of it, or having some sort of bridge to emotionally connect to the character. Do you think that a superhero movie needs a good villain in order for it to even be considered a superhero movie?
I do not. I would go so far as to say that there are some superhero movies, I can't think of any examples right now because I'm on the spot, but there are some superhero movies that might benefit from you taking the villain out altogether. I don't think that a superhero film inherently needs to have a super villain. Civil War comes to mind for me. I think that they could have done that without, like, Baron Zemo. I think they could have written that, in a way where he wasn't there, and his presence kind of makes it feel a little cheaper to me. There are a lot of superhero movies that do something similar to that.
Oh, I will say for that specific example, just to fight back a little bit, I think Baron Zemo kind of propels that story into action. But I see what you're saying, where there can be different kinds of conflict where it's not just like you know what I would throw out there. I would say Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, the first movie. I would say yes, there are villains obviously, but some of the emotional connections that we would typically see, or whatever, the leap of faith scene comes to mind. That for me is an inner conflict. Conflict doesn't always have to be man versus man. It can be, and I've talked about this I think in a past episode when it comes to villains, but I think that there are ways for superhero movies to establish different types of battles, where I think a good one, actually, I know not a superhero movie, but weirdly enough, is it weird that Moana comes to mind, where it's like technically there's a villain, but like at the end it's more of like man versus nature rather than man versus man, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
so
I see
it's
what
like
you're getting at.
just focusing on these different types of conflicts, I think, is something that if it doesn't exist a lot, because to be honest, I can't really think of a lot of examples off the top of my head either, but I think that maybe that's something that can be explored. And I think, just to wrap up this segment, I just want to say that I think superhero movies, definitely in modern day, are playing around a lot more with combining genres, and you said not to put it in a box. And I think that just to go full circle, the reason why they're not winning Oscars, and the reason why superhero movies in general are a little bit less respected in cinema, is due to the fact that they are put in these boxes. And I think definitely in the modern day, if you look at a movie like Robert Pattinson's Batman, it's Batman, so it's a superhero movie, but it feels like a different genre, sort of. So it's like, can you speak a little bit to that, on why it is that, let's see, I'm trying to off the cuff come up with a question here, but do you have any final thoughts, I guess, on the superhero genre?
I think my final thoughts. I'm gonna go into something that you said just a minute ago and kind of link it back to your Oscars thing, like you said.
Yep.
I do think what you said about superhero movies and inner conflict, as opposed to like man versus man, it's man versus self. I think that the most intriguing superhero stories have always been when the main character is in a battle with himself. Spider-Verse is a great example, like you just referenced, where the main conflict that's going on is between the superhero and something that's going on internally. And I think that a big problem is that the people making superhero films think that a supervillain is a kind of token, obligatory thing that needs to happen. So a lot of films will have this really interesting inner conflict that is very intriguing and I'm very attached to, and then at the end they'll just throw in a villain that they have to fight because it's a superhero movie, and of course they have to. And I think that I think that honestly, if people started making more superhero movies without like a big main supervillain that were a little bit more man versus self, a little bit more internal, a bit more reflective, we might get some that could actually win some Oscars. I think that might be the key.
Yeah, and just man versus self. I'm thinking like battling things that aren't necessarily even people. Like, I think people are hungry for those big battle sequences, but I think that there are ways to get those really high octane moments without having just put up your fists and let's battle. Like, that's I feel like there are other ways to get that action. So I think this has been such a wonderful conversation about superheroes, and I want to throw out a question to the audience here. What is your favorite aspect about superhero movies? And can you drop that down below in the comments? And I would, myself and Gabe, I'm sure would love to see what people have to say about all that, and what superhero movies need to do in order to be more competitive in that scene. But with that being said, talking about superheroes and how much we love them, we're gonna head into the draft room in a little bit. But as we gather our materials and get ready for the draft and for combat, we're gonna take a quick break, and we will see you right after. If you are enjoying the show so far, please remember to check out the episode playlist on Spotify. Also, leave a rating and subscribe so that you don't miss future episodes. Wouldn't that be a shame? Break time's over. Time for the final part of the show. And welcome back. The third segment is upon us. We are back for another segment of The Draft Room. And today, myself and Gabe, we are going to draft a squadron of 5 Marvel superhero characters. And it's going to be, you can choose these in any order, but we have to fill a slot for a fighter, or I guess I put down brawler, but a fighter, someone who's going to fight probably close up, hand to hand, ranged fighter, strategist, support, who is going to be there strictly to support your main offensive, your strategist, brawler, ranged. And then we have a 5th category called damage control, which is going to be for, if your heroes are fighting a villain, or a villain in their army, obviously there's going to be civilians running around screaming, "Oh, help, save me." And the damage control is going to be there to, that person's going to be in charge of taking care of all of that. So, a wide array of categories to try to fill. It's going to be competitive. Are you ready to get into this, Gabe?
I am. Let's do it.
I'm going to send it off to you first. I hope all the rules are super clear for everyone listening at home. I think I did an okay job explaining it. You can pick from literally whichever category, but you are on the clock.
Ooh, okay. So I'm going to start with my brawler, just because that's the first one I thought of. My pick is going to be Wolverine.
Okay.
Just because he's extremely durable, his healing factor, all of that. He's practically unstoppable unless you're fighting Magneto specifically. So that's my reasoning.
It's funny you say that, because I can't pick I didn't mention this at the beginning, but we are sticking with heroes, not villains, so I can't choose Magneto to go against Wolverine. Although I don't think he'd make that good of a brawler anyways. But yeah, Wolverine's a good pick. I think, for me, I'm going to go strategist turn 1, and I'm going to say Iron Man. I'm going to go Iron Man for strategist.
Ooh.
I feel like that's a safe pick. Obviously, he's a genius, and not only that, but he has his ways of kind of getting things done. So I hope he'll be a good leader for the team.
Smart. I like that one. I think next I'm going to go for my support. This one might seem a little bit weird, but I'm going to go with Colossus, also from the X-Men. Because
Colossus, okay.
Yeah, in my mind, it's because you can soak up hits. The man's made of pure metal. There's not much you can do to move him. He's a walking shield. And also, I couldn't turn down an opportunity to throw in the fastball special where Colossus picks up and chucks Wolverine. So I wanted to include that. So they can kind of work together. He's a little bit of support. He's a little bit of offense. If he needs to, he works well with Wolverine. Yeah.
That's a good pick. I hadn't even, to be honest, Colossus wasn't even on my radar, but I like that pick a lot. And now I'm trying to decide, where do I go with this? And I think this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go support, and I'm going to go Scarlet Witch.
Ooh, that's smart.
Because I think her ability to warp reality can really be a huge advantage for the offense. And even though I really debated just putting her as one of my offense, I think that she can do a lot more at support. So I'm gonna go Scarlet Witch.
Okay, that's a smart one. That's a smart one.
Okay, what do you got next? Do you still have to fill ranged, strategist, and damage control?
Yeah, I'm gonna go with damage control next, and I'm gonna pick Spider-Man. I think he is perfect at damage control. His spider sense, he can see threats coming. He can web people up to get him off the streets. He can stop debris from falling, and his obviously his spider sense, his reaction time will kind of help him with that.
Yeah, that's a good one. I was honestly eyeing Spider-Man as well for that same category.
Ooh.
I thought about putting Doctor Strange there.
Yeah.
Screw it, I'm doing it. I'm gonna go Doctor Strange at damage control. I'm gonna do that.
I like that. And him and Wanda together it's a power team.
That's
like that.
I mean, with Iron Man at the helm,
Yeah.
I'm kind of happy about how my draft is going right now. I'm not gonna, but
They're
yours is looking
unstoppable.
yours is looking pretty strong though.
Yeah, yeah. I think next I'm gonna go with my strategist, and
Okay.
I'm gonna choose Professor X. I think
That's the one
yeah,
I thought that was like, it was either Iron Man or Professor X.
yeah.
Those are
He's been the strategist ever since the character was created. You know, he's been leading the X-Men the whole time, and he's the person that he always has a solution. He knows what to do. You know.
right. Man, Professor X is really good. I'm trying to figure out, because I'm gonna be just completely honest. I thought that ranged would be kind of straightforward, but I cannot for the life of me think of anyone with ranged attacks other than Hawkeye, and I feel like choosing Hawkeye is just cementing an L.
Oh, I've got mine.
You've got yours? Ah.
Yep.
Okay, I see a character. I pulled up a list. I don't know if you'll allow this.
I'm a little worried.
Okay, if this counts as ranged, and I'll let you be totally the judge. Can I go for ranged? Can I go Black Bolt?
Ooh.
Can I do that? Is that allowed?
Yeah, I mean, that counts.
Okay.
He can like raise a city, so I would call that range.
Yeah, for those who are listening who don't know, because Black Bolt is not necessarily a household name. He's an Inhuman, and I think his only real appearance was in Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness, where he can utter a word, and it's blah blah blah. And I have Scarlet Witch, so I have the one person that's like would counter him. So
Yep.
I'm gonna go Black Bolt, and I'm pretty happy about that one.
You got me there. He's a good pick. I had not thought of that. Also, the Inhuman show, which nobody liked, but can't forget that.
Right.
All right, my last pick that's ranged as well. I'm gonna stick with the X-Men theme, I guess. I'll go with Gambit.
Ooh, can you talk about Gambit and his abilities?
Yeah, so Gambit, I believe the technical definition of his powers is that he can convert the potential energy stored in an object into kinetic energy. So basically, he can take an object, chuck it, and it like kind of explodes. So he, like, playing cards is his kind of signature thing. He'll just snipe people with exploding playing cards. That's kind of his shtick.
I like that. That sounds super interesting. And then it's up to me, right? And then we'll take a second to kind of paint a scenario with our five. I'm gonna go for my brawler. I think this one should be relatively obvious. Maybe, I don't know. I'm gonna go Hulk.
Yep.
Hulk is my fighter.
I was thinking about him too. Yep.
And Hulk versus Wolverine in that is a pretty good.
Classic.
And granted, I will say our teams are not necessarily fighting each other, because I feel like the draft would have gone slightly differently.
You'd win. For the record.
Probably, but you're not here to tell me that I'm supposed. You're supposed to argue
I'd win.
why yours is gonna win.
I would 100%. I'd win.
So paint this. Okay, so picture this, right? There's a big evil overlord, maybe not even Marvel canon. Who knows? Is coming with a huge alien army, and he's ready to take over the world. Your team of 5 is capable of defeating him in about a minute's time. Defend your team on why you think that they are the best team for the job.
Ooh, man. I think my team is pretty strong overall. I think yours has a lot of mass power. You've got magic, you've got range, you've got wide ranging things. You can like an arc. You can hit in a large area. Mine are a little bit more individual. Wolverine can fight 1 or 2 guys at a time. Gambit can snipe one guy. Colossus, one-on-one. Spider-Man, one-on-one. So you may be able to take him out a little bit faster. I'm going to be able to take him out a bit more efficiently. One-on-one. A little bit more smart about it. They're going to be a little more tactical about it, I think. I think that's the main draw of mine, is that they're, as opposed to more range, more wide scoping attacks, they can take it one-on-one, kind of pick their angle, work the battlefield a little bit better.
Right, and just for the audience sake, can you reiterate what your team of 5 looks like?
Sure, yeah. So my team is Wolverine, Gambit, Professor X, Colossus, and Spider-Man. And I think that the only person that doesn't do a whole lot offensively is Professor X. So regardless of category, for the most part, all of these guys are really strong one-on-one fighters. That's my thought.
But the thing about Professor X, though, is like he really when it comes to strategy, I think there's really only a couple choices there. I mean, I went with Iron Man pretty early because I feel like he's pretty capable, but Professor X is definitely right there, if not a better strategist, just because of the mind reading powers. I think another option, maybe in theory, could have been Mr. Fantastic, just based on his intelligence.
I agree. If I can take a pot shot at your team, I would have to say that the strength of my team over yours is that they might work a little bit better together underneath Professor X, as opposed to maybe being led by Iron Man. Your team is going to be kind of a little bit more disjointed, I think. Mine might be working together a bit more.
So let me try to argue for mine then. So just to recap, my team is Hulk, Black Bolt, Iron Man, Scarlet Witch, and Doctor Strange. Now, I feel like in this scenario, Hulk is going to be the main brute. I wanted a fighter that doesn't tire out too easily. So that's what I went with. I went with Hulk for just raw strength. I think Black Bolt he's got that range about him, but I think where you said this is where fighting an army might actually come in my favor, where Black Bolt can probably deal with many opponents at once, whereas Gambit, I'm not too well versed on his abilities, but based on what you're saying, it sounds like he doesn't necessarily excel with dealing with groups.
He could do it quick, but he couldn't do it all at once, I think is my thought.
Which is okay, Gambit. which is valid. And I think with Black Bolt I wanted something that can deal with the army as a whole. So I think if Black Bolt can deal with the army, I have Hulk to deal with the big bad. I have Iron Man to help put that all together, and I think one thing that really drew me to Iron Man over someone like Professor X is Iron Man can be on the field, whereas Professor X isn't going to go into the combat. So Iron Man can get a first-hand checkup on what's going on the field, and I think he can make instant sort of adjustments whenever as things go. Scarlet Witch dealing with support I think is going to be cool, talking about the reality bending abilities and stuff like that. I think really can help people like the Hulk. I think she can make people maybe smaller, and just dealing with little intricacies like that. I think Scarlet Witch can really aid those two, like Hulk and Black Bolt, and really just let them shine in what they do best. And Doctor Strange, I think goes without saying. I think Doctor Strange is on damage control. I think he can do it. I think he can clean up everyone else's messes. That's what he's used to doing, although he ends up making his own messes sometimes, but that's neither here nor there. But it is going to be up to the audience. It's up to you people listening at home to decide in the comments, and I'm going to post a poll on Spotify. Who won this draft? Was it my team or was it Gabe's team? So please let us know what you think. And that is it for the episode, and I'm going to head on over to the outro, but I want to thank Gabe so much for joining me today. And Gabe, do you have any final thoughts or final words for the people at home?
I just want to say thank you for having me, man. This has been really fun, and it just feels like the old days where we just sit and talk about superheroes for hours. So it's been great.
Thank you, Gabe. Thank you. You're such a homie. You're such a homie. But yeah, with that being said, we're gonna head on over to the outro. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Cinema Spotlight. Huge thanks to the homie for joining us for this episode. Chatting about superhero movies with Gabe always just brings me so much joy, so I hope you were all able to have fun geeking out with us. Don't forget to leave a like on the video if you enjoyed, and if you could take a moment to subscribe to the show on whichever platform you're listening to this on, I would greatly appreciate it. Be sure to follow our official Instagram at _cinema_spotlight for updates on when new episodes get released. I'll go ahead and shut the spotlight off for now. Until next time, stay classy, friends.